History remembers Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris as two of the greatest martial artists who ever lived. Their names became symbols of discipline, power, and mastery. For decades, fans have debated one question again and again: what would happen if these two legends ever truly fought? Most people believe the only time they faced each other was in the famous scene from The Way of the Dragon, where Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris battled inside the legendary Colosseum. That cinematic fight became one of the most iconic moments in martial arts history. The intensity, the respect, and the incredible skill displayed on screen left audiences around the world amazed. But what very few people know is that long before the cameras were rolling, before the lights of Hollywood captured their movements, Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris had already tested each other in a much quieter setting. No cameras, no reporters, no cheering crowd, just a small training space, a few trusted witnesses, and two martial artists who were curious about one thing: truth. That night was not about fame, ego, or proving who was stronger. Both men already knew what the other was capable of. Bruce Lee had built a reputation for explosive speed and revolutionary ideas about combat. Chuck Norris had dominated karate tournaments with discipline, control, and precise technique. They respected each other deeply. Yet sometimes respect leads to curiosity, and curiosity leads to a challenge. According to the few people who were there, the atmosphere in that gym was completely different from anything they had ever experienced. The room was quiet, almost tense, as if everyone understood they were about to witness something rare, a moment between two masters who had nothing to prove, but everything to explore. Neither man spoke loudly. Neither tried to intimidate the other. Instead, they simply prepared. Because when two martial arts legends stand across from each other, the silence itself becomes powerful. And what happened in the minutes that followed would become one of the most talked about yet least witnessed encounters in martial arts history. To understand how that moment came to exist, you have to understand the two men involved. Both were already respected in the martial arts world, but their journeys had been very different. Bruce Lee was known for challenging traditions. From a young age, he believed martial arts should never remain frozen in old systems. He studied different disciplines, tested techniques, and constantly asked questions others were afraid to ask. To Bruce, fighting was not simply about memorizing forms or following rigid styles. It was about efficiency, speed, and adaptability. This philosophy eventually led him to create Jeet Kune Do, a concept built on the idea that a martial artist should absorb what works and discard what does not. Bruce believed the human body should move naturally in combat, without being trapped by rules that limited creativity. On the other side stood Chuck Norris, a man whose path had been shaped by discipline and competition. Chuck had earned his reputation through countless tournaments, becoming one of the most dominant karate champions of his era. His strength came from relentless training, calm focus, and a powerful ability to control distance and timing. Where Bruce Lee was explosive and experimental, Chuck Norris was structured and precise. But what made their relationship unique was that neither man viewed the other as an enemy. In fact, they admired each other. Both understood the dedication required to reach such a level of mastery. Both respected the sacrifices that came with living the life of a martial artist. Their paths crossed several times through training circles and martial arts communities. Whenever they met, the conversations were often intense, not arguments, but thoughtful discussions about techniques, philosophy, and the future of martial arts. Bruce often spoke about breaking limitations. Chuck often spoke about discipline and structure. One evening, during a quiet training session, their conversation drifted once again toward the subject of styles and effectiveness. Bruce Lee leaned casually against the wall, watching Chuck finish a set of movements. After a moment, he spoke with his usual calm confidence. "Styles can become limitations," Bruce said thoughtfully. "A fighter should move freely, not according to a fixed system." Chuck wiped the sweat from his forehead and smiled slightly. "And yet," he replied, "structure is what builds a strong foundation." Neither man sounded defensive. The tone was respectful, almost curious. Bruce stepped closer and shrugged lightly. "Maybe the only way to understand it fully," he said, "is to test it." Chuck Norris paused for a moment. Then he nodded. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just a simple agreement between two men who understood exactly what that suggestion meant. There was no challenge shouted across a room, no crowd gathering around, no tension like the kind seen in movies. Instead, it was almost quiet, almost casual. But the few people nearby knew that something rare had just been set in motion. Later that evening, they agreed to meet in a private training gym. No publicity, no cameras, no audience. Only a few trusted friends would be present to observe. The goal wasn't to declare a winner or loser. It wasn't about pride or reputation. It was about discovery. two masters exploring the truth behind their philosophies. Because sometimes the greatest lessons in martial arts are not found in tournaments or competitions, but in the quiet moments when two skilled fighters stand face to face and test their understanding of movement, timing, and control. And that night, as the gym slowly filled with a small group of curious witnesses, everyone present could feel something unusual in the air. They knew they were about to witness something that would rarely be spoken about, but never forgotten. If you had the chance to witness a private fight between two martial arts legends, would you stay silent about it, or share the story with the world? And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel across the world. Later that evening, the small training gym slowly began to fill with a quiet sense of anticipation. It wasn't a large place. The wooden floor carried the marks of years of practice, and the walls were lined with simple training equipment, heavy bags, mirrors, and a few benches where observers could sit. There were no bright lights, no cameras, and no loud conversations. Only a handful of trusted martial artists had been allowed inside. Each one understood the significance of what might happen that night. At one end of the room stood Chuck Norris, calmly stretching his legs and shoulders. His movements were slow and controlled, the result of years of disciplined training. Chuck had built his reputation through tournament competition, where timing, patience, and control often decided the outcome of a fight. Across the room, Bruce Lee began warming up in his own way. His motions were quick, almost electric. Short bursts of punches sliced through the air as he practiced combinations at incredible speed. Even during warm-ups, Bruce's movements carried an intensity that immediately caught everyone's attention. The contrast between the two men was obvious. Bruce moved like a storm, explosive, unpredictable, constantly shifting his rhythm. Chuck moved like a mountain, steady, grounded, focused. The witnesses watched carefully, exchanging quiet glances with one another. Everyone in the room understood they were about to see something rare. Two martial artists at the peak of their abilities, preparing to test themselves against someone who truly understood combat. But what made the atmosphere different from an ordinary match was the absence of hostility. There was no anger in the room, no rivalry, only curiosity. After finishing his warm-up, Bruce Lee walked slowly toward the center of the mat. His expression was calm, almost playful, as if he were simply about to begin another training exercise. Chuck Norris followed, stepping forward with the quiet confidence that had made him one of the most respected fighters in karate competition. For a moment, the two men stood facing each other. No words, just eye contact. The room fell completely silent. Even the smallest sounds, the creak of the wooden floor, the soft movement of clothing, seemed louder in the stillness. Then Bruce spoke first. "This isn't about winning," he said calmly. Chuck nodded. "It's about learning." That simple exchange set the tone for what was about to happen. Both men stepped into their stances. Bruce Lee's guard was loose and fluid, his weight shifting lightly from foot to foot. His body looked relaxed, but there was an unmistakable readiness in the way he moved. Chuck Norris stood more upright, his posture disciplined and balanced. His stance reflected years of structured karate training, stable, controlled, and ready to react. The witnesses leaned forward slightly, unable to look away. One of them would later say the tension in that moment was unlike anything he had experienced before. Not because of fear or aggression, but because of the level of skill standing on that mat. Everyone knew that when two fighters of this level begin to move, even a single exchange can reveal something extraordinary. For several seconds, neither man attacked. They simply observed. Bruce studied Chuck's posture and breathing. Chuck watched Bruce's footwork and rhythm. It was like watching two chess masters studying the board before the first move. Then Bruce Lee made a subtle shift in his stance. Chuck Norris immediately adjusted his guard. Both men recognized something important in that instant. This would not be easy for either of them, and that realization only made the moment more exciting. Finally, Bruce Lee took a small step forward. Chuck Norris mirrored the movement. The distance between them closed slightly. The observers held their breath, because the next movement, the very first strike, would begin a moment that only a few people in the world would ever witness. And when it finally happened, it would prove just how fast and unpredictable two true martial arts masters could be. For a brief moment, the entire gym seemed to hold its breath. No one moved, no one spoke. All eyes were fixed on the center of the mat where Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris stood facing each other. The silence in the room felt heavy, almost electric. Both men remained still, studying one another. Years of training had taught them that the first seconds of a fight were often the most revealing. A single movement could expose rhythm, timing, and intent. Bruce Lee's stance looked relaxed, almost casual. His arms moved lightly in front of him, hands loose, his weight shifting smoothly between his feet. To someone unfamiliar with martial arts, he might have appeared calm and unguarded. But the witnesses knew better. Every small motion carried purpose. Across from him, Chuck Norris stood in a balanced stance, his guard firm and disciplined. His posture reflected countless hours of tournament experience. He wasn't rushing forward and he wasn't retreating. He was waiting, watching, calculating. For several seconds, neither man attacked. They simply moved slowly, adjusting their positions in small steps. It was almost like a quiet conversation, spoken not with words but with footwork and posture. Then suddenly, Bruce Lee moved. It happened so quickly that a few observers barely registered the motion. A lightning-fast jab shot forward. Chuck Norris reacted instantly. His arm lifted in a sharp defensive block, redirecting the strike before it could land. The sound of the contact echoed softly in the room. A few people in the gym exchanged surprised glances. The speed of that first exchange had been astonishing. Neither man showed emotion. Bruce Lee stepped back lightly, resetting his stance. Chuck Norris adjusted his footing, maintaining distance. The fight had begun. Bruce began circling slightly to the side, his feet gliding across the mat with incredible smoothness. His movements were unpredictable, constantly changing angles and rhythm. Chuck remained steady, turning carefully to face him, keeping his guard ready. The contrast between their styles became clearer with each second. Bruce Lee was fluid and explosive, testing reactions with quick movements and subtle feints. Chuck Norris was composed and controlled, conserving energy and waiting for precise opportunities. Then Bruce suddenly stepped in again. This time he launched a rapid combination. A quick punch followed by a second strike aimed at testing Chuck's defense. Chuck moved with surprising speed, stepping backward and redirecting the attack with calm efficiency. Another murmur moved through the observers. They were witnessing something remarkable. Two masters, both incredibly skilled, both reading each other in real time. Bruce Lee shifted his rhythm again, bouncing lightly on his feet. His eyes remained focused, watching for the smallest reaction. Then he changed angles abruptly, stepping slightly to the side before delivering another fast strike. Chuck responded immediately with a controlled counter, a precise kick that forced Bruce to step away and reset. The exchange lasted only seconds, but it revealed something important. Neither fighter had the advantage. They were evenly matched in awareness, timing, and control. The witnesses watched with growing fascination. One of them would later say the most impressive part was not the strikes themselves, but the way both men adapted instantly to every movement. Bruce Lee paused for a brief moment, then began moving again, this time slightly faster. His footwork became sharper, his feints more frequent. Chuck Norris adjusted carefully, maintaining distance and protecting his center line. The tension in the room continued to build. Each exchange was faster than the last. Punch, step, counter. Movement flowed almost too quickly for the eye to follow. But despite the speed, there was no reckless aggression. Both men remained controlled, focused, disciplined. Then something unexpected happened. Bruce Lee suddenly slowed down. Instead of attacking immediately, he paused and studied Chuck Norris carefully, almost as if he had discovered something interesting. A small smile appeared on Bruce's face. Chuck noticed it. For a second, neither moved. The room grew quiet again. The witnesses sensed something important was about to happen. Because in that moment, Bruce Lee wasn't simply fighting anymore. He was learning. And Chuck Norris realized the same thing. This was no longer just a test of speed or power. It had become something deeper, a conversation between two masters using movement instead of words. And everyone in that room knew the next exchange might reveal something extraordinary. For several seconds after that last exchange, neither Bruce Lee nor Chuck Norris moved forward. The air in the gym felt different now. What had begun as a cautious test of reactions had evolved into something far more complex. The witnesses sitting around the edges of the room could feel it. This was no longer just a simple sparring session. It had become a silent battle of understanding. Bruce Lee began circling again, but this time his movement looked slightly different. His steps were lighter, quicker, and more deliberate. Instead of attacking immediately, he started probing with small feints, subtle shoulder movements, quick shifts of weight, tiny gestures designed to test Chuck's reactions. Chuck Norris watched carefully. His eyes followed Bruce's footwork, his guard adjusting almost instinctively to every small motion. Chuck had spent years competing in high-level tournaments where patience often made the difference between victory and defeat. He wasn't rushing. He was observing. Bruce suddenly stepped in with another fast combination, his fists moving with incredible speed. Chuck blocked the first strike and redirected the second, stepping slightly to the side as he maintained control of the distance between them. The movement was smooth and efficient. Bruce immediately adjusted, changing angles and launching a quick kick that forced Chuck to shift backward. Another exchange. Another adjustment. To the witnesses watching from the benches, it almost looked like a game of chess played at lightning speed. Every move forced an immediate response. Every response created a new opportunity. One observer later described it perfectly. They weren't just fighting each other. They were studying each other. Bruce Lee increased the pace again, testing Chuck with rapid footwork and quick strikes meant to break rhythm. His philosophy of adaptability was visible in every movement. Chuck Norris remained composed. Instead of matching Bruce's speed directly, he focused on control. His blocks were precise, his counters measured. Each motion was economical, using only the energy necessary to maintain balance and defense. The contrast between their styles had never been clearer. Bruce was fluid and explosive. Chuck was calm and calculated. Then something unusual happened. During one quick exchange, Bruce stepped in with a fast punch, only to pull it back at the last second. Instead of continuing the attack, he paused mid-movement. Chuck reacted instantly, preparing to counter. But Bruce didn't strike again. He simply stepped back. For a moment, both men stood still. The sudden pause surprised everyone in the room. Bruce Lee relaxed his shoulders slightly and let out a small laugh. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't arrogant. It sounded almost appreciative. Chuck Norris lowered his guard just a fraction, curious. Bruce shook his head slightly, still smiling. "Now we're learning," he said calmly. The words hung in the air for a moment. Chuck Norris understood exactly what Bruce meant. Up until that point, they had been testing reactions, speed, and timing. But now something deeper had emerged. Both fighters had reached the point where they recognized each other's strengths. They understood the level of skill standing in front of them. The tension that had filled the room earlier softened slightly. Not because the fight was over, but because the purpose had become clearer. This wasn't about proving dominance. It was about discovery. Bruce rolled his shoulders lightly and stepped forward again, this time with a slightly slower pace. Chuck adjusted his stance and met him in the center once more. They exchanged several more controlled movements. Strike, block, step, counter. But the energy had changed. Instead of pushing aggressively for an advantage, both men seemed focused on exploring each other's techniques. Every movement carried curiosity instead of pressure. The witnesses noticed the difference immediately. What they were watching now wasn't simply a contest. It was an exchange of knowledge. Two martial artists communicating through motion. One of the observers would later say that moment was the most unforgettable part of the entire experience. Not because of any spectacular strike, but because of the respect that had formed between the two men. Bruce Lee finally stepped back again and nodded slightly. Chuck Norris returned the nod. Neither needed to speak further. Both understood what had just happened. They had pushed each other, tested each other, and discovered something valuable in the process. And everyone in that room knew they had just witnessed something extremely rare. A moment when two legends met not to defeat one another, but to understand each other. For a moment after that final exchange, the gym remained completely quiet. The small group of witnesses sitting along the edges of the room seemed almost frozen, as if no one wanted to interrupt the atmosphere that had formed between Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris. Both men stood a few steps apart on the mat, breathing steadily. The intensity of the earlier movements had faded, replaced by something calmer, something thoughtful. Bruce Lee slowly relaxed his stance first. His hands lowered slightly as he stepped back, rolling his shoulders as if releasing the tension that had built during the exchanges. Chuck Norris did the same. Neither man looked exhausted, but both looked focused, as though they were replaying every moment of the encounter in their minds. For the witnesses, it had all happened incredibly fast. The strikes, the blocks, the sudden adjustments in rhythm. Everything had unfolded with a speed that was difficult to follow. But for the two fighters standing on the mat, every movement had carried meaning. Every reaction had revealed something. Bruce Lee took a slow breath and looked directly at Chuck Norris. For a brief second, the two men simply studied each other again, but this time the atmosphere was different. The earlier tension had been replaced by clear understanding. Bruce nodded first. It was not the nod of a competitor claiming victory. It was the nod of a martial artist acknowledging another master. Chuck Norris returned the gesture with the same calm respect. The few people watching around the gym could feel that the moment had reached its natural conclusion. There was no dramatic ending, no final decisive strike, and yet, everyone present knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Bruce Lee stepped forward slightly and spoke in his usual calm tone. "That was good." Chuck Norris smiled faintly. "Very good," he replied. The words were simple, but the meaning behind them carried weight. Both men understood the level of skill required to move the way the other had moved. Bruce Lee believed strongly that martial arts should always evolve. He often spoke about removing unnecessary limitations and allowing the body to react naturally in combat. Chuck Norris had spent years refining his techniques through structured training and tournament competition, building discipline through repetition and control. That night had shown something important. Despite their different philosophies, both approaches had produced fighters capable of incredible awareness and precision. Bruce Lee turned slightly and glanced around the gym for a moment. The observers sitting quietly along the walls quickly looked away, as if they didn't want to break the respectful atmosphere. One of them would later say the room felt almost peaceful after the exchange had ended. The tension that had filled the air earlier had disappeared. In its place was admiration. Bruce Lee looked back toward Chuck Norris and gave a small smile. Chuck nodded again. No further explanation was necessary. The purpose of their encounter had already been fulfilled. Neither man had stepped onto that mat to prove superiority. They had come to explore movement, timing, and reaction against someone who truly understood combat. And that was exactly what they had done. Bruce Lee picked up a towel from the side of the gym and wiped the sweat from his face. Chuck Norris stretched his arms again, relaxing his muscles after the brief but intense exchange. A few quiet conversations began among the witnesses. Some spoke in hushed tones about the speed of Bruce's strikes. Others mentioned Chuck's calm defense and precise counters. But most of them simply sighed in silence for a moment longer, processing what they had just seen. Because moments like that were rare. Two martial artists at the peak of their abilities, testing each other without ego, without anger, and without the pressure of competition. Bruce Lee walked toward the edge of the mat and paused before leaving. Chuck Norris followed. As they passed each other, Bruce lightly tapped Chuck on the shoulder, a small gesture of acknowledgement. Chuck responded with a respectful nod. No trophies were awarded. No winner was declared, yet somehow the encounter felt complete. The witnesses in that room would later share the story carefully with close friends, describing the quiet fight they had seen between two legends. And each time the story was told, one detail remained the same. It was never about who won. It was about the respect that existed between two masters who understood that the greatest lessons in martial arts are often learned not through victory, but through mutual understanding. Years later, the story of that quiet encounter between Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris would continue to circulate among martial artists and fans around the world. Not because someone had won, not because someone had been defeated, but because the moment revealed something far more meaningful about true mastery. Many people are familiar with their famous on-screen fight in The Way of the Dragon, where Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris faced each other inside the legendary Colosseum. That scene became one of the most iconic moments in martial arts cinema. The intensity, the skill, and the dramatic setting captured the imagination of audiences everywhere. But the quiet exchange inside that training gym carried a different kind of importance. It was a reminder that real martial arts is not built on ego. It is built on understanding. Both Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris had already achieved extraordinary success. Their reputations were established, and their abilities were respected across the martial arts world. Yet neither man approached that moment with arrogance. Instead, they approached it with curiosity. Bruce Lee believed deeply in growth. He often spoke about the importance of removing limitations and allowing a fighter to evolve through constant learning. Chuck Norris represented discipline and structure, demonstrating how dedication and controlled training could produce remarkable results. When those two philosophies met on that mat, something powerful became clear. Different paths can lead to the same level of mastery. The encounter showed that respect between martial artists is far more valuable than victory. In a world where people often argue about who is stronger, faster, or more skilled, the real lesson from that moment was much simpler. True masters do not fight to prove their greatness. They train, test, and grow so they can better understand the art they love. That quiet exchange between Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris became a symbol of that idea. Two legends meeting not as rivals, but as students of the same lifelong discipline. And perhaps that is why the story continues to inspire people today. Because it reminds us that strength without humility means very little. Real strength comes from respect, from discipline, from the willingness to learn even when you are already considered a master. And that is the legacy both Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris left behind, not only through their achievements, but through the example they set. Before we finish, I'd love to hear from you. Which moment in this story stood out to you the most? Was it the quiet tension before the fight began? The incredible speed and control during their exchanges? or the powerful respect they showed each other at the end? Let me know in the comments. Your feedback helps us create even better stories about legendary figures like these. And don't forget, more fascinating stories about martial arts legends and unforgettable moments are coming soon. Thank you for watching.